Well, good morning. Of course, my name's Jonathan Davies, Senior Pastor of Seeds. Today we have quite a different format for you than what we would regularly do. And we're going to pick up all of Seeds pastors presenting to you in this format for you to be able to hear something different, something that's important to the life of Seeds. Some of you might have heard me talk about the 5 pillars of Seeds and the various aspects of those bring to our shared life. So what's going to happen in the next few minutes is each of our pastors are going to bring a perspective on a unique part of those pillars. And they're going to give their reflections or their understanding, particularly their different voice in how it works. So rather than just hear me in this format, you're going to hear 6 of us connecting to you in this way. So I hope that it's helpful for you. Look, I encourage you to sit back, don't relax, make yourself comfortable and be ready to listen and learn what God is saying to us, all of Seeds, one church, multiple locations, what God is wanting us to do and to be, and the best that we can be. So get ready and listen to what God's going to say to you in particular.
Well, hey Seeds, my name is Aaron Chalmers and I'm the campus pastor here at Seeds Hallett Cove. And the pillar that I've chosen to look at is perceptive. And whenever I hear the words perceptive or perception, I think of the Old Testament watchman. And so in ancient Israel, of course, you didn't have anything like long-range radar. So you didn't really know when your enemies were going to come and attack. What they tended to do is they tended to build large walls around the cities. And in order to get into the cities, the only access point was via the gate. Now, on top of those gates, there would often be in a tower. And it was on those towers that they stationed the watchmen. And their job was basically to scan the horizon. And then if they saw any kind of enemy forces approaching, they would sound the alarm. They would let people know that there was a problem on the horizon. And so they kind of speak to me about perception in 3 ways. The first is that perception is not a passive activity. It's not something that you simply sit back and receive. Perception actually involves an active responsibility. It's like the watchman scanning the horizon, looking for what's out there and then responding. And it's really tied to being awake. It's tied to be focused and attuned to what you see happening around us. Now, there's a couple of passages in the prophets where they talk about their roles in terms of watchmen. And the one that stands out for me is in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1. And I'll just read it to us. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. And what really stands out to me is it's not just a passive task. The prophet there is looking to see what he will say to me. And so that's my first reflection on perception. There's an active thing. We're looking to see what God will say. The second is that perception requires a response. And so it wasn't just enough for the prophet to see that there was an enemy on the horizon. They actually had to do something. And in particular, they had to blow the horn. They had to sound the alarm. There was a response required when they actually perceived something. And my text here is Ezekiel 33, verses 2 to 3. Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, when I bring the sword against a land and the people of the land choose one of their men and make him their watchman, and he sees the sword coming against the land, he blows the trumpet to warn the people. You know, imagine a watchman who was there standing and saw an enemy coming and he didn't do anything. That's not really a watchman at all. They've got a job. They've got a response that they need to make. And so I believe that we are not meant to keep silent. You know, we're not meant just to sit back and to wait. When we perceive, that is an invitation to step into what God is doing. So perception requires a response. And my third thing, when we think about watchmen and we think about perception, is that perception leads to blessing for many. You see, the watchmen didn't do their role because it was going to be a blessing for them. Sure, you know, they'd be able to escape as well from the enemy. But the reason that they blew the trumpet, the reason that they sounded the alarm was so that they would save the people who are in the city with them as well. And I believe that as we're called to be a a perceptive community that will result not just in blessing for Seeds Hallett Cove, but I believe it will be resulting in blessing for the community around us and for the churches around us as well. So Seeds, let's take our place on the wall. Let's be watching, let's be discerning, and let's be responding to what God's doing in our midst. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Mark Elford. I'm the pastor at Seeds Park. I want to share with you just a few little things about one of the key pillars of our church, which is being invitational. By way of illustrating that, there was a particular fisherman called Andrew. Andrew happened to be at that stage a disciple of John the Baptist. And he had an encounter with Jesus. And he and his colleagues spent a whole day with Jesus, which obviously was an incredible thing, and he decided to follow Jesus. But it's the response of Andrew that's really interesting. So we read in John chapter 1 that the first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah," that is the Christ, and he brought him to Jesus. And that's the key thing about being invitational, is that we bring people to Jesus. And Andrew did that. He brought his brother Simon to Jesus. And our mission statement for Seeds Church is bringing people to Jesus and being transformed into his passionate disciples. Can I tell you, this was a pretty important invitation, because that character, that fisherman, Simon, Jesus actually said to him, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which when translated is Peter. So Andrew the fisherman invited his brother, brought his brother to meet Jesus. And Simon became Peter, and Peter became the apostle, the key leader in the early church. So we are called to be invitational, and there are many opportunities to be invitational in our church. Our 3 campuses run Alpha. We're running an Alpha right now at Seeds Park. We had a room full of people last night attending Alpha. There are opportunities to attend things like men's breakfast. Things like the Road to Christmas is a wonderful opportunity to invite family and friends. Things like the carols in the park. Even a Sunday service, dare I say, is a great thing to be invitational. But can I just say there's one other aspect to that, is not only are we called to be invitational, but the wonderful thing is that God invites us to be part of his enterprise in this world, to be part of the kingdom of God. So it's an adventure. So God invites us to participate in the work of the kingdom. You know, 4 years ago, I made a big step. I stepped away from my engineering career because I sensed that God was calling me into a new thing, and I became a pastor at a certain age, which is a bit unusual, and we've now been going for 3 years at Seeds Park. But we are called, irrespective of our age, of our gender, our circumstances, to be part of God's adventure in this world. So God, not only are we called to be invitational, but we're also called to we're invited to participate in the work of God's kingdom. So invitational is a really key foundational pillar of Seeds Church. Bless you.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm the Associate Pastor at Seeds Aberfoyle Park. As I was looking at the pillars of Seeds, I was struck by the word sticky. And I started to think about what examples I could think of that were sticky. I thought of children with their sticky hands on the wall. I remembered the child who stuck bubblegum in their hair and we had to cut it out. I remembered in a previous church, the youth group that stuck a youth to the wall with gaffer tape, which of course is a very different sticky to the post-it notes that are stuck on my desk. And I thought these are probably not really helpful examples of stickiness. So I went to the Bible and I read this in Colossians. It comes from chapter 3, verses 12 to 14. And in these verses, we're being encouraged to clothe ourselves with compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. We're also encouraged to bear with one another, to forgive one another, just as Jesus has forgiven us. And then in verse 14, we read, "And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. The word binds stands out to me in that passage. It is something that holds other things together. It's a stickiness. And when I think about what it means to be a church that is sticky, where we're in different places, where we are different people with different attitudes, what binds us together, what holds that stickiness? And of course, that stickiness is love. And love is something that keeps us together, that holds us together when we're all doing different things, but are wanting to be one family together. You see, when we think about being one church, we don't think about my campus or my ministry. We think instead of who are we as the church? How can I encourage others? How can we see God at work in Seeds? And so we encourage and we carry each other through the different challenges of life because of the love that binds us together. And I think that we see this sticky love, particularly when there are challenges, when things aren't always going well. We know in our own relationships that it's that sticky love that comes to the surface when there is challenges before us. And so as a church, we want to think about when there are those challenges, how am I showing that sticky love? Am I showing that compassion, that humility, that kindness to others? Is that being seen by people around me? You see, that's what I think about when I think of being sticky, of encouraging unity within our church. And so the challenge for us in that is, are we contributing to the unity of Seeds? And how might we do that better as we think about how we are one church in multiple locations? Do our words, our attitudes, our actions show that sticky love? Because when that love is strong, that makes us sticky. And that stickiness helps us to truly be Seeds, one church in multiple locations.
G'day, I'm Matthew. I'm the Generations Pastor here at Seeds. You may or may not have heard of the story of Daniel Flynn, who had this big vision to start up a social enterprise, and by letting people buy products, ordinary products, all of the profits would go towards alleviating poverty across the world. It was a big vision, and Daniel pursued and persisted with that vision, and out of that formed this company called Thank You, which you might have come across. Their products are still on the shelves. And Daniel reflected on his story and the making of Thank You, and one of the quotes that he has in the book of the story is this, and I love it. He says that the fear of failure has killed more dreams than failure itself. The fear of failure has killed more dreams than failure itself. It's a part of Daniel's story, but it's also a fantastic quote and truth that we can take on board here at Seeds as we look at one of our pillars, which is the pillar we've called falling forward. A part of our story and a part of our future is to be a people who take risk, who don't let the fear of failure stop us from achieving the big vision that God has given us, a vision to see people come to know Jesus and transformed into his passionate disciples. And we've lived that out as a church as we've taken risks in the past and sent a group from Aberfoyle to Aberfoyle Park, and then sent another group of some great and talented, gifted people to Hallett Cove. And there's been lots of stories and steps along the way where we have risked, where we have trusted God, where at times we've fallen over and there has been some hurt and pain, but God has been faithful. As we've taken risks, we've fallen forward, we've stumbled, but we have got up again by God's grace, and God has remained faithful. You might be familiar with the story of the parable of the talents that Jesus tells in Matthew. And in that story, the manager heads away. He offers one servant 5 talents or bags of gold, one 2, and the last one 1. And when he returns, he finds that they have done different things with what he's given them. The one who had many talents has invested and multiplied what was given to him, and the master is pleased. The one with 2 is also really pleased. And the one with 1 had buried it and only gives the 1 talent back. The master's not so pleased with that one. I love that. It's a challenging parable because as I look around at churches around us, many churches are telling a story of decline and even despair. Seeds does not tell that story. We are, for whatever reason, by God's grace, a church that God has gifted with 5 talents, 5 bags of gold. And we are called to be good stewards of that, to be risk takers with that, to trust God with that, to be willing to step out, to allow ourselves to stumble and fall, to fall forward. That is a part of who we are and who God calls us as we go forward. May we be a risk-taking, falling forward church, innovative, continue to not stay stagnant, but to see what God has given us multiply for his glory.
Probably weren't expecting that. My name is Matt, I'm the youth pastor here, and I'm going to be finishing our last pillar, expectation. Recently, I've been reading about the life of George Mueller. He lived in Bristol, England, in the 1800s, and his life is well worth reading about. It's incredibly fascinating. He lived in an area with many young people who were living in poverty. They were abandoned, orphaned, living on the streets. Think Oliver Twist. George was moved by this, and he saw the need and was moved to action. And he started up an orphanage and ended up a few different orphanages to care for these young people. And he ended up caring for over 10,000 orphans over his lifetime. You think, how did he care for? How did he fuel this? How did he raise the funds to be able to support this incredible ministry? What loan did he take out? What fundraising strategy did he have? Well, the answer was none of this, actually. He had a very simple answer, and it was to trust God and bring things to him in prayer. His strategy was to go, well, if God's asked me to do it, well, then I'm going to trust him and ask him for it. He lived with an expectation that God will provide. A story that really highlights this is one day he was sitting down in an orphanage, ready for breakfast. But the thing was, there was no food, there was no drink, there was nothing there that was going to be able to support the orphans to learn at school that day. But he sat down in faith, trusting in God, and he said, hey guys, let's gather around, let's pray. And he prayed this prayer. He said, hey God, thank you for the food that we're about to eat. Amen. And as soon as he'd finished that prayer, there was a knock at the door. It was the baker. The baker came in and said, hey, I don't know what it was. I couldn't sleep last night, but I just sensed that God was calling me to bake you some bread because you guys were in need. And at 2 a.m., I got up and baked some bread, so here it is. And George was incredibly moved by this, and he took the bread and he went to go back inside. And before he could even sit down again, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was the milkman. The milkman's milk cart had actually broken down just out the front of the orphanage, and therefore the milk was going to spoil. So he asked if the orphanage could do with the milk. Again, George was amazed. And you hear a story like this and it almost sounds unbelievable. But there are countless stories, time and time again, where George chose to trust in God for his provision. And again, God came through time and time again. Mueller knew that God was calling him to this. So if it was God's plan, he would trust that God would provide. And he did again and again. Well, he knew the words of Jesus, seek first his kingdom and righteousness, and all of these will be given to you as well. Expectation comes from putting God first, and God will make provision for whatever we truly need in order to accomplish his will. I firmly believe right now that God is doing something really significant in our church. That God has been incredibly generous, that He's provided so much. We see this in Aberfoyle Park, in Hallett Cove, in the 26 young people that chose to get baptised last year. But I want to ask the question, but what if? But what if this is just a glimpse of what God wanted to actually do in and through us? That God was actually wanting to do so much more. That what if we actually had an expectation and we trusted in God as our provider, in His strength for His glory? What would it look like for us to live out these 5 pillars, to have an expectation that God will provide?
So there you have it, Seeds. 5 perspective on the 5 different pillars that we're wanting to bring and to be and embody as a church together. 5 unique views. I hope some of those, or at least one of those, resonated with you, and you can see where you can contribute as part of those. Interesting thing, many of you would have been part of a planning process that you spent a lot of time on, and you worked hard at, and you workshopped, and you did all those sorts of things. And then 3 months later, no one remembered anything. In fact, the common joke is that it's in the bottom drawer of somebody's office, never to be seen again, until you review it again in 5 years' time. We don't want this to be like that. We want this to be integrated into our church's life. We want this to be personified in your being so that you can live out the fullness of what God has called you to be. Now, why would we say that? Why would we say that we want this to be more than just a white paper that is printed up glossy on a wall somewhere or in a bottom drawer somewhere? Because we think this is part of bringing people to Jesus and being transformed into His passionate disciples. You've probably heard me talk about that a few times before. It is who we are when we are at our best. And these 5 pillars will help us get there. So the 5 pillars are for each of us, for us to integrate into our lives, for us to embody and to live out of. But it's not just for us. It's for those people who yet don't know about Jesus, those people who haven't heard about His grace and His love and His mercy, those people who haven't yet walked into the beauty of knowing Jesus and serving Him. So I encourage you, think about these things. I hope some of you took notes and you can think about them further. There's certainly a sermon series that I've preached at Aberfoyle. It's on our website. It's on our YouTube page, and you can look at that and you can see again in further detail of what I've said, what my perspective is on these things. So right at this moment, I'm going to ask a little indulgence, and I'm going to ask that you would answer 2 questions. And it shouldn't take too long. I'm begrudging a bit of time. I'm taking a bit of time in the service, but I'm asking you to turn to the person next to you or the little group around you. Please don't leave anybody out, and ask these 2 questions. And I've just got them here written for me. What for you, for your perspective, what pillar of these 5 Seeds 5 pillars do you see working now, and how can you support it? So it's a positive question. What do you see working, and how can you support it to work even better? And then once you've gone around if there's a couple, 3 of you, once you've answered all that, answer this one then. What pillar of these 5 do I see not working, and how can I support it? Okay, so I encourage you, turn around to those around you. It's actually okay to move the chairs, that's fine. And turn around and answer these questions. So let's start integrating into who we are and be the church that God has made us to be. God bless you as you think about this and as you go about your life following Jesus.